Good afternoon, everyone.
Daughter.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to meet you, even virtually. My name is Alexandros Anesiadis from University of Pandion in Greece, and my partner is Niki Athina Polymeri from University of Baja, California.
Hi,
We're
nice
so
to meet
happy. We're so happy that we're going to participate in the ISMS MAS um, uh,
Congress.
Congress, and we would love to be in Mexico with our physical to have a physical appearance at the Congress, but sadly we cannot do it at the moment. Uh, what we're examining, what me and Nikki are examining, is the crossover. But what about the crossover? It's about the crossover of metal and punk, between metalheads and punks, and their opinions, affinities, and musical preferences. While there are past researches on the crossover of punk and heavy metal, most of them, nearly all of them, are focused on the musical side of things. We are approaching it in the preferences of fans, and we are approaching it in today's fans' opinions on the crossover of its genre. So let me start the presentation. The presentation is entitled as "Crossing the Borders." Why crossing the borders? Crossing the borders. First of all, is a very nice song by a metal band called Air Apparent on their 1988 record, "One Small Voice." If you haven't checked it out yet, please check it out. Amazing band. Okay. So the objective of the present study was to examine.
Are you, excuse me, are you presenting the presentation? Because I cannot see.
No, we haven't started yet.
Yes.
Okay, can I please, start with the presentation? Share the presentation with you.
Mm, yes, we can
So,
see.
yeah. So sorry. Let's start with the first. Okay. So crossover and its definitions. Uh, there were the whole interaction between heavy metal and punk has been proudly researched uh, by academics and non-academics since the 19 late 1970s, early 1980s. One term is speedcore. Speedcore was firstly coined by Brian Pussett Schroeder. You might be familiar with Brian Pussett Schroeder because not only he was a vocalist for the seminal speedcore band named Septic Death, but he was also an artist. He is an artist, and he offered his work in bands like Misfits, Metallica, Queensryche. He's a pretty notorious guy. I'm surely that you have come across with his art many times. So, Pusset describes speedcore as the crossover where what is known as heavy metal is mixed with the sounds of punk. The outcome naturally is considered heavy metal by the metalheads and punk by the punks. He also added that this crossover, the speedcore, uh, managed to combine the ferocity of and the heaviness of heavy metal with the fast, the fast music and totally crazy style of punk. Another definition. There are many definitions, but we chose those ones. Is by Kennedy on who defined crossover between heavy metal and punk subcultures as an outcome of the recognition of the common ground between metalheads and punks that took place in the mid 1980s. So he managed to discuss this crossover in a more subcultural term. There are many other definitions. For example, Waxman, Professor Waxman, in his classic and right now book, "This Ain't the Summer of Love," he discusses and about this crossover and mentions that uh, it's the bands that fuse qualities of punk rock and heavy metal in musical terms. And he also starts with us, the very first ones being the Dictators and the Runaways. We're talking about 1970s bands. Uh, so in terms of crossover, these are our definitions. You can maybe the first example of using the word crossover was well, this kind of tricky because some people claim that it was used by DRI on the 1986 record crossover, or it was used by SOD on the lyrics of United Forces, where they mentioned crossover to a final scene. But these are good. This is a good starting point for our definition of crossover. I would like also to mention that a whole new subgenre that combined heavy metal and punk was created. It was called crossover. Of course, crossover hardcore or crossover thrash. You can hear it to this term in many ways. There's a book that it was out there for quite a while. Crossover the Edge, which was about all the bands of the 1980s that managed to combine all those different sounds with interviews. I'm very happy to say that I was the writer of that book. so
Yes, you were.
yeah. Um, so let's go to the conflict because we would like to focus also on the conflict. The conflict in youth cultures. I think that many of you are familiar with Hebdids and the subculture of the meaning of style. Hepdix narrates in an early definition of these conflicts, mentioning the cases of rockers and the mods in the 1960s UK. He also mentions that there wasn't a real hatred between those two subcultures until the press took advantage by promoting the tension between them. So this is the first um, this is the first case of conflict in youth subcultures, the rockers and the mods. Afterwards, it was the skinheads versus everybody. Later on, it was the metalheads and the punks, which we're going to focus on. Okay, conflict between fans of heavy metal and punk. Phillips and Kogan state that early in the punk subculture, many fans saw punk and metal as being mutually exclusive, with metalheads deriding the perceived ineptness of punk musicians, while many punks despised what they saw as the pomposity and self-seriousness of heavy metal. Ian Christie describes the situation among the two youth subcultures as generally hostile in the early formative years of Motorhead and Damned, where battles between heavy metal fans and punks would even erupt in the streets of London. As we mentioned, there were the confrontations went physical, but it wasn't just fans. The musicians too. They didn't like each other. They didn't like not each other, but it's each other genre. Punk is gutter music. We mentioned one day Joe Elliott by Def Leppard. Punk was only important in what we hated it, in that we hated it, and we didn't want anything to do about it. Steve Harris from Iron Maiden. Steve Harris keeps on telling that, but there are some things that I would like to discuss after that. After this, while I first heard the term new wave British heavy metal, I thought it was about idiots in spandex, Rat Scabies, the drummer of the Damned, and there were many, many more that they were focused on, that they were enemies on this. They were they thought about um, its genre with the worst of ways. Uh, Oddly enough, one member from of Iron Maiden, uh, Dave Murray played in the 1970s punk band, and they recorded. I think they were called the Secrets, and they recorded a cover of the Young Ones. Uh, while he was out of Iron Maiden for some months. And on the other hand, Paul Diano was a great friend of Cockney Rejects and the Cox Power. And what can you say about the first Iron Maiden LP? There's so many punk punk influences on it. There are many people that like to that they don't want to be they don't approve my thoughts, but I think that there are many punk elements on it. And what can you say about the Damned? The Damned. One day they played along Motorhead, and they became Motor Damned, and they recorded some records. Some they recorded one release, I think, that named as Motor Damned. So let's go to the past researches on metal and hardcore punk crossover. Tristan attempts to identify the role of middle class and in metalheads, and how metalcore, which is something that is different than crossover, is a product for and from them. Well, metalcore is a term that it was coined later in the 1990s, and it can the subgenre of metalcore can be attributed, most of it, at the most part of it, to heavy metal, not into hardcore. Lewis Kennedy went even further and regarded the relationship between metal and hardcore punk as symbiotic, a symbiotic relationship, that those two each other were very they were connected, even though that they were in parallels.
And complementary.
Mhm. Professor Waxman focuses more on the musical crossover, musical enmity between metal and punk, while he also captures the tension between punks and metalheads. He captured that tension using letters from magazines like Sound or Cream in the readers' letters, where everybody was cursing another, metalheads versus punks in the early 80s. The only empirical research by Christine Carl Hal Hansen and Ronald D. Hansen. Uh, it connected rock music preferences and personality characteristics using some specific measures, perceptions of social reality, personality scales, and music preferences, and reported self-exposure, discussing over results such as sexism in metalheads and rejection of authority in punks. Things that are have been wildly stressed, uh, both both in by punk and metal, and metal researchers. So let's start with our research. What Nikki and I did, and our methodology. Our main focus was to understand how today's metalheads and punks worldwide perceive each other and their opinions about the crossover in musical terms, alongside subcultural ones. So we distributed questionnaires that contained mixed types of questions uh, to forums like metalarchives.com, electricraven.com, anarchopunk.net. In addition, we also approached people from social media pages on Facebook, such as 80s Hardcore Punk Flyers or 80s Heavy Metal and Hard Rock Collectors, or and Metal Music Librarians. We managed to gather 379 valid responses in a time frame of 6 month period between December 2020 and June 2021.
One.
So the results, very interesting results. The number of participants, punk fans were about 229 and metal fans were 148. We strongly encouraged girls to participate. Sadly, the amount of girls participating in our research was that much, especially in punk, where only 21 women uh, participated, and uh, in metal fans 29. The age range. This is where we find this very interesting because uh, it's it's all it's all the half of the contestants in both cases, both punk and both metal fans, were from 25 to 35, and the other ones were 36 to 45. And another very interesting feature is that almost all contestants from both music subcultures, uh, the 90% of them, of the male sample, uh, were bachelor degree graduates or attended some college someday in their life. So let's go with the questions. Question number one: what hardcore punk component do you find least appealing? This was a question that was focused in the heavy metal fans. So half the respondents of heavy metal fans either favor the hardcore punk scene or stand indifferent to this kind of music. The 60% of the heavy metal fans answer that they do not like punk and hardcore as a whole, or they do not like the punk image and style. About 13% are not fond of the punk fans. The same question, but with a heavy metal component, was asked to the punk fans. They seem polarized in terms of in terms of their responses. The 14% of them favor heavy metal music. 14% of them find them indifferent towards the genre, and they tend to despise the image of heavy metal in 23%, followed by its lyrics too, 17%, and the heavy metal fans too, 17%. So heavy metal fans either do not like the punk scene, the punk genre as a whole, or are more versatile regarding the crossover, while punk fans tend to be more resistant to the crossover, as they pay more attention to the fans of the other genre, the style and image and the lyrics of the music. Question number two for metal fans. Asking the heavy metal fans with some taste into hardcore punk music to state their favorite hardcore punk subgenres, their three main answers was early 1980s American hardcore and worldwide old school hardcore in general, classic 1977 punk, and crust and grindcore. So we can see that they're focused on maybe the ones that have most influ- influenced somehow the heavy metal bands of new wave British heavy metal or the thrash metal bands, as long as the crust and grindcore subgenres that their brutality and ferocity are more akin to those ones into extreme metal. And as for the bands that they liked from punk, Discharge, GB8, and Misfits were the favorite bands, and this is by no means an
A
surprise.
surprise.
It's not. It's by no means a surprise because hundreds of thrash metal bands, especially, mentioned Discharge, GB8, and Misfits as influences, and a very interesting info is that all three bands were covered by Metallica.
Mm-hmm.
The same question applying to punk fans, asking the punk fans with some taste into metal music to state the favorite metal subgenres. 16% like classic heavy metal and doom metal. 16% like new metal, followed by almost equal percentages of punk fans who like death metal, black metal, and finally at 12% that tend to like speed or thrash metal. So we can see that the punk fans are not so polarized in what in their favorite metal subgenres. I think that this has to do about what's we discussed it in a paper. It has to do with the tastes of the punks. For example, a punk fan with that favors mostly New York hardcore or 1980s, early 1980s hardcore. He likes mostly thrash, speed and thrash metal bands, or the ones that are into 77 punk, they like classic heavy metal and doom metal. And about the bands that the punk fans like, first one is is Slayer. Second one is Iron Maiden, great majority, followed by Black Sabbath, Motorhead, and Metallica. Very obvious choices for them too. So, question number three. The final question is about the was regarding about festivals such as Maryland Death Fest or Chaos in Texas. Chaos in Texas. The heavy metal fan respondents answered by 49% that they might attend one festival of such a kind. But why did we choose those festivals? We choose those festivals because both of them, in both of them, the billing does not only include bands from uh, both music genres, but the main characteristic is that the music style of the bands that are invited to play have a very well defined hardcore punk or heavy metal sound. For example, I can recall in Chaos in Texas on the 2016 Manila Road playing alongside crust and punk bands, and Manila Road playing. I think they were the headliners too, which is an epic metal band and a great one too. Uh, so continuing on this question, the 25% of metalheads have a positive view on these kinds of events, and they will mostly like attend one. So we have overall 75% of metalheads that have a general positive thought about those festivals. Punk fans, on the other side, answered on the majority the same, with most half, for about 48% of the contestants answering that they might attend one, but the fans of these genres tend to polarize again, since 13% answered that they do not care about those festivals and won't attend one, while 80% answered that they have a positive view about those festivals and they would attend one. Again, it's a big proportion of the positive thoughts of the ones. Uh, the results of this last question give a broader review and more insight regarding the crossover between heavy metal and punk music, because attendance in concerts proves to be a vital role for culture, economy, and innovation nowadays. I think that Nikki has to take the lead and speak about that one furthermore.
Um, do you want to
Yeah, yeah.
conclude? Because carry on with the next slide.
Uh, okay. Sorry.
Because
Yeah, yeah.
we are out of time.
So, further research. There, there are so many researchers that you can that the academics can apply in terms of heavy metal and punk crossover. They can focus on the race, they can focus on on the gender, they can focus on the nationality, about how this crossover appeals to modern day heavy metal fans and punk fans. They can also focus on the education. They can also focus on other terms such as age, the younger ones versus the older ones. There are many researchers that somebody can conduct regarding the crossover between punks and metalheads in fans term in subcultural terms,
And behavioral
and,
variables
and yeah, behaviorally, of course. Thank you so much for all of you. We're
for the
really we're really not happy that we both Nikki and I couldn't attend physically, as we mentioned earlier. But hopefully, in 2 years from now, especially if this is in Europe. We can. I think that we can both do it.
and take it from there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the invitation from Alex's and my side. Um, we are looking forward meeting you all on a different occasion. Thanks so much for the invitation and stay heavy.